Sarah Porter stared at the email on her phone, reading it for the fifth time. A job offer from one of the most prestigious private elementary schools in Boston. She hadn't expected to hear back, especially not with an offer. It had been 3 years since she'd taught in a classroom. "You should take it," her sister Jen said from across the kitchen table. "It's been long enough, Sarah." Sarah put her phone down and wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. The warmth didn't reach the cold knot in her stomach. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You'll never feel completely ready," Jen said. Her voice was gentle but firm. "That's not how grief works." Sarah knew her sister was right. After losing both her husband Mike and their unborn child in the car accident, she'd withdrawn from everything. Her teaching career, her friends, even family gatherings became too much to bear. The small apartment she now rented had become both sanctuary and prison. "The school year starts in a month," Sarah said. "That doesn't give me much time." "Time for what? To come up with more excuses?" Jen reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "Listen, I know it's scary, but you were an amazing teacher before, and those kids at Westbrook need someone like you." Sarah scrolled through the email again. 4th grade, 22 students. The same grade she'd taught before. Principal Edwards had mentioned in the interview that several students in the class had experienced trauma or family disruptions. "They need stability," he'd said. "Someone who understands that healing takes time." At the time, Sarah had wondered if he knew about her past, about what she'd been through. Of course he did. Boston's education community was small, and her story had made the local news. "What if I freeze up?" Sarah asked. "What if I can't handle it?" "Then you call me," Jen said simply. "You take a deep breath, you step outside, and you call me." "But Sarah, I don't think that's going to happen. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Later that evening, Sarah sat on her small balcony watching the sunset paint the city skyline. She thought about Principal Edwards and his kind, weathered face. He hadn't pushed during the interview, hadn't asked about the gap in her resume. Instead, he talked about the school community, about the support system for teachers, about the resources available. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jen. "Did you decide yet?" Sarah looked at the unfinished response to the job offer. The cursor blinked steadily, waiting for her answer. 3 years ago, she had a classroom decorated with student artwork, a husband who brought her coffee on early mornings, and a nursery painted pale yellow waiting for a baby that would never come home. Now she had silence and safety, but not much else. Maybe it was time for something more. She finished typing her response, accepting the position. Her finger hovered over the send button for several seconds before she finally pressed it. The knot in her stomach tightened, but alongside it was something else. A tiny flicker she hadn't felt in years. Something that felt almost like hope. The next morning, Sarah woke early. For the first time in months, she had a purpose that went beyond just getting through the day. She pulled out her old teaching materials from the storage closet, dust covering the boxes. Flipping through lesson plans and activity ideas, memories flooded back, both the painful ones and the good ones that had been overshadowed by grief. She found herself making lists, planning first-week activities, thinking about how to arrange a classroom she hadn't even seen yet. When her phone rang, it was Principal Edwards. "Sarah, I'm thrilled you've accepted the position," he said. "I wanted to invite you to come see your classroom next week. Our maintenance staff is finishing up the summer cleaning, but you're welcome to start setting up whenever you'd like." "I'd like that," Sarah said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "There's something else," Principal Edwards continued. "One of your students, Oliver Wright, has had a particularly difficult year. His father is raising him alone after his mother left, and he's struggling. I thought perhaps you might want to meet him before school starts, help ease his transition." Sarah felt that familiar panic rising, the fear of connecting, of caring too much, of losing again. But before she could think of a reason to refuse, she heard herself say, "Yes, I think that would be good." After hanging up, Sarah sat among her scattered teaching materials, heart racing. She had just agreed to meet with a child who was hurting, a child who needed someone steady in his life. She wasn't sure she could be that person. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jen. "Proud of you. This is just the first step." Sarah looked around at the boxes, at the life she had packed away. It was time to unpack, literally and figuratively. This job wasn't just about teaching math and reading. It was about showing up again, about being present in the world. The thought terrified her, but for the first time in 3 years, the fear didn't feel paralyzing. She picked up a faded construction paper card a student had made for her years ago. "Best teacher ever" was written in crooked letters. Sarah tucked it into her planner. She would need the reminder in the weeks ahead that once upon a time, she had been good at this. Maybe she could be again. The classroom smelled of fresh paint and floor cleaner. Sarah stood in the doorway, taking in the empty space that would soon be filled with young voices and energy. Room 118 had large windows along one wall, letting in streams of morning light. Standard-issue desks were stacked in one corner, waiting to be arranged. "What do you think?" Principal Edwards asked, standing beside her. "It's bigger than my old classroom," Sarah said. She stepped inside, running her hand along the whiteboard. "Good light. Nice view of the playground." The previous teacher retired after 30 years, Edwards explained. She was quite attached to her unique, decorating style. "We thought you might appreciate a fresh start." Sarah nodded, noticing the faint outline where motivational posters had once hung. A fresh start. That's what this was supposed to be. "Oliver and his father will be here at 11, Edwards said, checking his watch. "That gives you about an hour if you want to get your bearings." Coffee's in the staff lounge down the hall. After he left, Sarah set her bag on the teacher's desk and began walking the perimeter of the room. She tried to envision how she wanted it set up. Reading corner there, perhaps. Math center by the windows. Part of her wanted to recreate her old classroom to slip back into. The familiar. Another part knew that wouldn't be possible or healthy. She was arranging desks into small groups when she heard a knock. A tall man with dark hair stood in the doorway, his hand on the shoulder of a boy who looked about 9 or 10. The boy had his father's strong features, but softer, with sandy brown hair falling across his forehead and into eyes that seemed determined to look anywhere but at Sarah. "Miss Porter?" the man asked. "I'm Daniel Wright. This is Oliver." Sarah wiped her hands on her jeans and crossed the room. "It's nice to meet you both. Please, come in." Daniel's handshake was firm, his smile polite but reserved. Oliver stayed half hidden behind his father, one hand clutching the strap of his backpack. "Oliver, Ms. Porter is going to be your teacher this year," Daniel said. "Hi, Oliver," Sarah said, crouching down to his eye level. "I'm still setting up our classroom. Would you like to help me decide where things should go?" Oliver looked up at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead, bud." Slowly, Oliver moved further into the room, his eyes scanning the space. "Where's all the stuff?" he asked quietly. "What stuff?" Sarah asked. "The books and things. Ms. Winters had lots of stuff." "Well, I haven't brought in my books yet," Sarah explained. "I thought maybe you could help me figure out what kinds of books our class might like." Oliver seemed to consider this. "Do you have any about dinosaurs?" "A few. Are dinosaurs your favorite?" He nodded, some of the tension leaving his small shoulders. "T-Rex is the best, but I like raptors too." "I have a book about how they think raptors might have had feathers," Sarah said. "Kind of like big, scary birds." Oliver's eyes widened slightly. "Really?" While Oliver began telling her about dinosaurs, Sarah glanced at Daniel, who was watching his son with a mixture of relief and something that looked like longing. She recognized that look, the face of someone who remembered when conversations like this were commonplace rather than rare. "Oliver has trouble connecting with new people," Daniel said quietly when Oliver wandered over to examine the classroom bookshelf. "His mother left last year. It was sudden." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and meant it. "We're managing," Daniel replied, his tone suggesting the topic was closed. "Principal Edwards mentioned you've had some experience with children dealing with loss." Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "I have, yes." Oliver's therapist suggested meeting his teacher before school starts might help with his anxiety, Daniel continued. "He's a good kid. Smart. Just struggling right now. Moving to a new school is hard even without everything else," Sarah said, watching as Oliver carefully examined each corner of the classroom. "Thank you for bringing him today. It helps me too, getting to know at least one student before everyone arrives." Daniel's expression softened slightly. "First year at Westbrook? First year back teaching at all, actually." The words came out before Sarah could consider whether she wanted to share that information. Daniel seemed to understand there was more to the story, but didn't press. "Well, Oliver's previous teachers have all been close to retirement age, so you're already a refreshing change." The comment caught Sarah off guard, and she found herself smiling, a genuine smile that felt foreign on her face. "I'm not sure if that's a comment about my teaching abilities or just my age, Mr. Wright." Daniel, please. And it was merely an observation. There was a hint of warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. Oliver returned, clutching a world map he'd found rolled up in the corner. Can we hang this up? He asked. The three of them spent the next hour arranging furniture and talking about the upcoming school year. Oliver gradually became more animated, especially when Sarah mentioned the class science project would involve building models. He spends hours on his Lego creations, Daniel explained. Especially lately. Building things helps sometimes, Sarah said. When words are hard to find. Daniel gave her a curious look, as if seeing her more clearly. Yes, exactly. When it was time to leave, Oliver seemed reluctant. Can I come back tomorrow? I'll be here all week setting up, Sarah said. Maybe your dad can bring you by again before school starts. Daniel checked his phone. I've got meetings the rest of the week, but... He hesitated. My sister Amy picks Oliver up from day camp. I could ask if she could bring him by one afternoon, if that's all right with you. Of course, Sarah said. Any afternoon works. After they left, Sarah sat at her desk, feeling drained, but in a way that was different from the exhaustion that had been her constant companion for years. This was the tired that came from doing something meaningful, from connecting. She looked around the half-arranged classroom and could almost hear the echoes of what it would soon become. For the first time in 3 years, she was thinking about the future, not just dreading it or trying to avoid it, but actually planning for it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel Wright. Oliver hasn't stopped talking about dinosaurs and your classroom. Thank you. Sarah read the message twice, feeling something crack open inside her, like a door that had been sealed shut for years was finally being pried open, just enough to let in a sliver of light. The first day of school arrived with the particular chaos that only 22 fourth graders could create. Sarah stood at her classroom door, greeting each student with a name tag and a smile that felt less practiced than it had during the morning staff meeting. Oliver arrived with a woman who introduced herself as Amy, Daniel's sister. He's been up since 5, she whispered to Sarah. Nervous excitement, I think. Oliver clutched his dinosaur-covered backpack, eyes darting around at the other children. When he spotted Sarah, some of the tension left his small frame. Good morning, Oliver, Sarah said. I saved you a seat in the blue group. That's where we'll be doing our science projects. His eyes lit up. The dinosaur ones. We'll get to dinosaurs, Sarah promised. Go on in and check out your desk. I put something special there for each student. As Oliver entered, Sarah watched him find his desk and discover the small welcome gift she'd prepared for each child. A personalized bookmark and a short note. For Oliver, she'd found a bookmark with a feathered raptor. By lunchtime, Sarah felt as though she'd run a marathon. Keeping track of 22 different personalities, needs, and energy levels was exhausting, but in a way that felt strangely satisfying. The classroom hummed with activity as the children worked on their All About Me posters. Sarah moved between the groups, helping with spelling and offering encouragement. When she reached Oliver's desk, she found him staring at his blank poster. Having trouble getting started? She asked gently. He nodded, pencil gripped tightly in his hand. I don't know what to write. Well, I know you like dinosaurs, Sarah said. What else do you enjoy? Oliver thought for a moment. Legos. And my dad makes really good pancakes on Saturdays. That sounds like a great start, Sarah said. Maybe you could draw some of those things? As Oliver began sketching, Sarah noticed a girl named Lily watching them. Miss Porter? Lily asked. Can I sit with Oliver? I like dinosaurs too. By the end of the day, Sarah's feet ached and her voice was hoarse. But watching the children file out of the classroom with their completed posters filled her with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. She was erasing the whiteboard when she heard a knock. Daniel stood in the doorway, Oliver half hidden behind him. Sorry to interrupt, Daniel said. Oliver insisted we come by rather than meeting at the after-school program. He wanted to show me his poster. Of course, Sarah said. We had a good first day. Oliver tugged on his father's sleeve. Come see my desk, Dad. And I made a friend named Lily who likes raptors too. While Oliver showed his father around the classroom, Sarah gathered her things, trying not to eavesdrop on their conversation. It was difficult not to notice the way Daniel knelt to Oliver's level, giving his son his full attention as the boy excitedly explained every detail of his day. He hasn't been this animated in months, Daniel said quietly when Oliver went to retrieve his poster from the drying rack. Whatever magic you worked today, thank you. No magic, Sarah replied. Just a classroom where it's safe to be himself. Daniel studied her for a moment. You make it sound simple. It's not, Sarah admitted. But it's necessary. They fell into an awkward silence until Oliver returned, proudly displaying his poster with its drawings of dinosaurs, Lego towers, and what looked like a stack of pancakes with a stick figure man beside them. That's my dad, Oliver explained, pointing to the figure. He makes the best chocolate chip pancakes. Is that so? Sarah smiled. I'm more of a blueberry pancake person myself. Dad can make those too, Oliver said. He's really good at cooking now. He had to learn. Daniel's ears reddened slightly. I'm still learning, bud. Me too, Sarah said. About a lot of things. After they left, Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing her notes from the day. 22 different stories, 22 lives intersecting with hers. It was overwhelming if she thought about it too much. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jen. First day survival status? Sarah smiled and typed back, still standing. Actually, it was good. Over the next few weeks, a routine began to take shape. Sarah threw herself into teaching with an intensity that surprised her colleagues. She stayed late planning lessons, arrived early to help struggling students, and volunteered for lunch duty just to observe the social dynamics of her class. Principal Edwards stopped by one afternoon as Sarah was setting up a solar system model. You're doing well here, he said. The students respond to you. Sarah nodded, adjusting Neptune's position. They're good kids. And you're good for them, Edwards replied. Especially Oliver Wright. His father mentioned the change he's seen. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Daniel had been dropping Oliver off more frequently, sometimes staying for brief conversations about Oliver's progress. They were professional exchanges, but Sarah had begun looking forward to them more than she wanted to admit. Oliver's smart, Sarah said. He just needed someone to notice. Edward smiled knowingly. Sometimes that's all any of us need. Later that week, parent-teacher conferences began. Sarah prepared detailed notes for each student, determined to give parents a complete picture of their child's progress. When Daniel arrived for his appointment, Sarah had Oliver's portfolio ready. He's doing really well in science and math, Sarah began. His reading comprehension is improving, though he still gets frustrated with longer texts. Daniel nodded, flipping through Oliver's work samples. He's reading more at home too. Those dinosaur books you lent him are apparently bedtime essentials now. I'm glad, Sarah said. I've also noticed he's making friends. Lily and him have become quite the paleontology team. He mentioned her, Daniel said, smiling. First time he's talked about a friend since. He trailed off, then cleared his throat. Since we moved after the divorce. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of that simple statement. Change is hard at any age. It is, Daniel agreed, meeting her eyes. Something passed between them, a mutual recognition of loss, of rebuilding, of moving forward one small step at a time. After reviewing Oliver's academic progress, Sarah hesitated. There's something else I wanted to mention. Oliver wrote a story last week for our creative writing assignment. It was about a boy whose mother was a space explorer who had to leave Earth for an important mission. Daniel's expression tightened. His mother isn't on a space mission. She chose to leave. She has a new family in Colorado. I know, Sarah said gently. But this might be Oliver's way of processing what happened. Children often use stories to make sense of difficult realities. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I never know what to say when he asks about her. I don't want to lie, but the truth is complicated, Sarah finished for him. Maybe you don't need all the answers right now. Maybe just listening is enough. After Daniel left, Sarah sat alone in her classroom, thinking about the conversations that had unfolded throughout the day with various parents. So many families navigating their own complicated paths, just as she was. For the first time in years, she felt connected to something larger than her grief. A community of people all trying their best, all carrying their own invisible burdens, all moving forward one day at a time. Autumn painted the Boston Common in vibrant reds and golds as Sarah led her class on their first field trip of the year. The fourth graders scattered like leaves in the wind, collecting specimens for their nature journals, while parent volunteers supervised small groups. Ms. Porter, Oliver called, running toward her with a maple leaf bigger than his face. Do you think this is the biggest one in the whole park? Sarah crouched down to admire his find. It's definitely a contender for first place. Oliver beamed, carefully placing the leaf between the pages of his journal. Sarah watched as he rejoined Lily and two other children who were comparing their collections. 2 months into the school year, Oliver had blossomed from the quiet, anxious boy she'd first met into an enthusiastic student who raised his hand in class and had a small but solid group of friends. "He's like a different kid," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Daniel watching his son from a few feet away. He had volunteered to chaperone the field trip, taking a rare morning off from his architectural firm. "Not different," Sarah corrected gently. "Just more himself." Daniel nodded, hands in the pockets of his jacket. "Either way, it's good to see." They stood side by side, watching the children explore. Sarah was acutely aware of Daniel's presence beside her, the faint scent of his cologne, the way he seemed more relaxed outside the confines of the classroom or his office. "I never thank you properly," Daniel said suddenly, "for the advice about Oliver's questions about his mother. It helped." "What did you tell him?" Sarah asked. "The truth, mostly. That people sometimes make choices that hurt others, not because the others deserve to be hurt, but because they're trying to find their own way." Daniel's voice was quiet. "I told him it's okay to miss her and be angry at the same time." "That's good advice for anyone," Sarah said, thinking of her own complicated grief. Daniel glanced at her. "You sound like you speak from experience." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted from the group by the pond. One of the boys had slipped on the muddy bank and fallen halfway into the water. Sarah and Daniel hurried over, along with several other adults. The boy was more startled than hurt, but his clothes were soaked and muddy. "I've got a spare sweatshirt in my car," Daniel offered. "It'll be huge on him, but it's better than staying wet." While the other chaperones reorganized the groups, Sarah accompanied Daniel and the shivering student to the parking lot. Daniel retrieved a Boston University sweatshirt from his trunk and handed it to the boy, who changed in the park restroom. "Crisis averted," Daniel said as they walked back toward the group. "Though I think our nature walk might need to become a nature sit-down for a while." "Probably wise," Sarah agreed. "Though with fourth graders, sitting still is its own challenge." Daniel laughed, a warm sound that Sarah realized she hadn't heard often enough. "Tell me about it." "Getting Oliver to sit through dinner is like asking a hurricane to pause." "You two have dinner together every night?" Sarah asked. "I make a point of it," Daniel said. "My work schedule is flexible enough that I can be home by 6 most evenings." After Caroline left, he paused. "Well, routines became important." Sarah nodded. "Routines can be lifelines." Back with the class, Sarah organized the children into a circle on a dry patch of grass. She led them through an observation exercise, asking them to close their eyes and listen to the sounds of the park, then open their eyes and notice details they might have missed before. Daniel sat cross-legged with Oliver's group, following Sarah's instructions with the same concentration as the children. Sarah found her gaze drawn to him repeatedly as she moved around the circle, noticing how his serious expression softened when he listened to the children's observations. After the field trip, as the children boarded the bus back to school, Daniel approached Sarah again. "This was good," he said. "I haven't spent a morning in the park since, well, in a long time." "You should do it more often," Sarah suggested. "The research on nature and well-being is pretty compelling." "Is that your professional opinion, Miss Porter?" There was a hint of teasing in his voice. "Absolutely," Sarah replied with a small smile. "I prescribed weekly doses of fresh air and falling leaves." Daniel seemed about to say something more when Oliver bounded up to them. "Dad, can Ms. Porter come to my birthday next weekend? We're having dinosaur cake." Sarah blinked in surprise as Daniel's ears reddened slightly. "Oliver, we can't just spring invitations on people," he said. "Why not? You said I could invite friends, and Ms. Porter likes dinosaurs too." Sarah knelt to Oliver's level. "That's very thoughtful of you to include me, Oliver. When is your birthday?" "Next Saturday," Oliver said excitedly. "I'm going to be 10, double digits." Sarah glanced up at Daniel, who looked both embarrassed and amused. "It's just a small gathering at our house," he explained. "A few kids from class, family. Nothing fancy." "I'd love to come," Sarah heard herself say, surprising herself as much as Daniel. "If that's really okay." "Yes." Oliver pumped his fist in the air. "Can you help Dad with the games? He's not very good at them." "Thanks for the vote of confidence, buddy," Daniel said dryly, ruffling Oliver's hair. "Go find your seat on the bus. I'll be right there." After Oliver ran off, an awkward silence fell between them. "You really don't have to come," Daniel said. "He gets excited about ideas, but he'll understand." "I want to," Sarah interrupted. "Unless it makes you uncomfortable." Daniel studied her face. Not uncomfortable. Just, I don't want to blur lines or put you in an awkward position. It's a child's birthday party, Sarah said, though she understood the unspoken concern. I've been to several for my students over the years. This wasn't entirely true. Before, she had occasionally attended group celebrations where multiple students from her class were present. She had never accepted an invitation to a single student's home party. But something about disappointing Oliver felt impossible. Then we'd be happy to have you, Daniel said finally. I'll text you the details. As the bus pulled away from the curb, Sarah found herself wondering what line they were approaching, and why the thought of crossing it didn't frighten her as much as it should. That evening, she called Jen. I think I might be making a mistake, she said after explaining about the birthday invitation. Or you might be living your life again, Jen replied. When was the last time you accepted any social invitation? Sarah couldn't remember. After the accident, she had declined everything. Holidays, birthdays, casual get-togethers. The world of the living had felt too loud, too normal, too impossible to navigate with her grief. He's a parent of a student, Sarah said. He's also a person, Jen pointed out. And so are you, Sarah. Remember that part. The following Saturday, Sarah found herself standing on the porch of a charming colonial house in Newton, holding a wrapped present and fighting the urge to turn around and drive away. Before she could decide, the door swung open, and Oliver stood there in a t-shirt with a T-Rex wearing a party hat. You came, he exclaimed, as if he had doubted it until that very moment. I promised, didn't I? Sarah said, stepping inside. The house was warm and inviting, with the organized chaos that comes from a home where a child is loved and allowed to be a child. Dinosaur decorations hung from the ceiling, and the sound of children laughing came from the backyard. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. When he saw Sarah, his whole face brightened. You made it, he said. Welcome to the madhouse. November brought early darkness and the first hints of winter to Boston. Sarah found herself staying later at school, reluctant to return to the quiet of her apartment as the days grew shorter. On a Tuesday afternoon, she was organizing materials for the next day's science experiment when she heard a soft knock. Daniel stood in the doorway, alone. Sorry to interrupt. Oliver forgot his math workbook, and we have homework tonight. Of course, Sarah said, moving to Oliver's desk to retrieve the forgotten book. He was in a hurry when the bell rang. Amy picking him up today. Daniel nodded, accepting the workbook. Thanks. You're here late. Just prepping for tomorrow. Sarah gestured to the collection of paper, aluminum foil, and other materials spread across her desk. We're building solar ovens. Sounds more interesting than my fourth grade science class, Daniel said, lingering in the doorway. We just grew beans in cups. Sarah smiled. We do that in spring. Some classics never go out of style. A comfortable silence fell between them. Since Oliver's birthday party 3 weeks ago, these brief encounters had become more frequent and less awkward. Daniel volunteered for another field trip, and Sarah had run into them at the Science Museum one weekend, leading to an impromptu lunch together at the museum cafe. I was wondering, Daniel said finally, if you might want to grab coffee sometime. Without 22 fourth graders as chaperones. Sarah felt her heart rate quicken. I'd like that. They arranged to meet that Saturday at a cafe halfway between their neighborhoods. After Daniel left, Sarah sat at her desk, a mix of excitement and anxiety swirling in her stomach. It had been so long since she'd done anything resembling dating that she wasn't sure she remembered how. When Saturday arrived, Sarah changed outfits 3 times before settling on jeans and a burgundy sweater that Jen had insisted she buy last year. It's just coffee, she told her reflection. With the father of a student, the distinction felt important, even as it felt increasingly irrelevant. The cafe was busy with weekend customers, but Daniel had secured a small table by the window. He stood when he saw her, a gesture that struck Sarah as both old-fashioned and endearing. I was afraid you might change your mind, he admitted after they'd ordered. I almost did, Sarah replied honestly. Several times. Daniel's expression was understanding. I know the feeling. Their conversation started with safe topics. Oliver's progress in school, Daniel's current architectural project, a book they had both recently read. But as their coffee cups emptied and were refilled, the conversation shifted toward more personal territory. How long have you been teaching? Daniel asked. Almost 12 years, Sarah said, with a 3-year break before Westbrook. Daniel nodded, waiting to see if she would elaborate. When she didn't immediately, he asked gently, "Can I ask why the break?" Sarah stared into her coffee cup. She had rehearsed this moment in her head, knowing it would eventually come, yet still feeling unprepared. "There was an accident," she said finally. "My husband and I were driving home from a doctor's appointment. I was 7 months pregnant." Daniel's expression shifted to one of quiet understanding. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel," Sarah continued, the words coming more easily now that she had started. "Mike died at the scene. I was in the hospital for weeks. They couldn't save the baby, our daughter." She hadn't said these words aloud to anyone new in years. Everyone in her previous life already knew the story, had lived through it with her in various ways. Telling Daniel felt like crossing a threshold. "After that, I couldn't go back to teaching," she explained. "Couldn't face other people's children when I'd lost my chance to have my own." Daniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Thank you for telling me." Sarah nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "It gets easier to talk about." "Not easy, but easier." "I understand," Daniel said. "In a different way, but I do." He told her then about his marriage to Caroline. How they had been college sweethearts, how they had built a life together, how the cracks had started to show after Oliver was born. She wasn't ready to be a mother, Daniel explained without bitterness. She tried, but she was miserable. "One day, I came home from work, and she told me she'd met someone else. Someone who didn't want children. That must have been devastating," Sarah said. "For Oliver, more than for me," Daniel admitted. "By then, I knew our marriage was over. I just hadn't been ready to be the one to end it." "How did you manage?" Sarah asked. "Suddenly being a single parent?" Daniel smiled ruefully. "Badly at first. Take out for dinner every night. Missing work deadlines. Forgetting school forms. My sister Amy saved us, honestly. Moved in for 3 months until I found my footing." Their conversation continued, moving backward and forward through their lives. College years, first jobs, childhood memories. When they finally noticed the time, 3 hours had passed. "I should get back," Daniel said reluctantly. "Oliver's at a friend's house, but I need to pick him up by 4. Outside the cafe, they stood facing each other, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "I'd like to do this again," Daniel said. "If you would." "I would," Sarah replied. "Very much." On the drive home, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. Sharing her story hadn't dimmed the day as she had feared it might. Instead, it felt like setting down a heavy backpack she had been carrying for too long. The following weeks brought a gentle shift in their relationship. Coffee became dinner. Texts about Oliver's schoolwork became conversations about books, movies, and increasingly, their hopes and fears. Daniel invited Sarah to Thanksgiving dinner with his family, and to her own surprise, she accepted. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Sarah asked Jen during their weekly phone call. "Meeting his entire family? Why wouldn't it be?" Jen countered. "You like him. He likes you. Oliver adores you. He's still the parent of a student," Sarah said, though the argument sounded weak even to her own ears. "For a few more months," Jen pointed out. "Then summer comes, and Oliver moves to 5th grade. Besides, Principal Edwards already knows your friends, right?" Sarah had been transparent with Edwards about her developing friendship with Daniel, careful to ensure there was no perception of favoritism toward Oliver. Edwards had been supportive, mentioning only that he expected continued professionalism at school, which had never been in question. Thanksgiving arrived cold and clear. Sarah stood on Daniel's porch with a homemade apple pie, her mother's recipe, feeling like she was standing on the edge of something important. Daniel's family welcomed her warmly. His parents, Richard and Martha, his sister Amy and her husband Tom, and their teenage daughters Emma and Grace all treated Sarah as if her presence was the most natural thing in the world. "Oliver hasn't stopped talking about you," Martha told Sarah as they arranged dishes on the dining room table. "It's a mess. Porter says this and MS. Porter showed us that. He's a special kid," Sarah said honestly. "And my son?" Martha asked with the directness of a mother who had earned the right to such questions. "What do you think of him?" Sarah met the older woman's gaze. "I think he's one of the most devoted fathers I've ever met. And one of the kindest men." Martha nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good answer." After dinner, while the others watched football in the living room, Sarah helped Daniel wash dishes in the kitchen. "Your family is lovely," she said, drawing a serving platter. "They can be a bit much," Daniel admitted. but they mean well. They love you, Sarah said. All of you. Daniel set down the dish he was washing and turned to face her. Thank you for coming today. I know it couldn't have been easy. Sarah thought about the previous 3 Thanksgivings, how she had declined Jen's invitations, preferring to spend the day alone with her grief rather than pretending to feel grateful. How different today had felt, surrounded by the warm chaos of family, even one that wasn't her own. Actually, she said, it was easier than I expected. Later, after helping Oliver get ready for bed, Sarah found herself sitting on the front porch with Daniel, despite the November chill. The house behind them hummed with family voices, but outside, there was a peaceful quiet. Oliver asked me something tonight, Daniel said, his breath visible in the cold air. He asked if you were going to be his new mom. Sarah felt her breath catch. What did you tell him? That relationships take time to grow, Daniel said carefully, and that no one would ever replace his mother, but that people can have different kinds of love in their lives. He turned to look at her, his expression earnest in the porch light. I also told him that you are very important to both of us, but that grown-up relationships are complicated. Are they? Sarah asked quietly. Complicated. Daniel's hand found hers in the darkness. Sometimes, but not always in bad ways. Winter settled over Boston, transforming the city into a snow globe. Sarah's classroom windows frosted over each morning, creating natural canvases for her students to draw on with their fingertips before the heat kicked in. December brought holiday excitement, classroom parties, and the particular challenge of keeping 20 to 4th graders focused as winter break approached. Ms. Porter, are you coming to our house for Christmas? Oliver asked one afternoon as he helped Sarah clean up after an art project. His question was casual, but his eyes watched her carefully. I haven't been invited, Sarah replied gently. Dad says it's rude to assume, Oliver said, clearly repeating something he'd heard. But I told him you probably don't want to be alone on Christmas, and he said I was right. But we still had to ask properly. Sarah smiled, touched by the boy's concern. That was thoughtful of you both. So will you come? We're having Grandma and Grandpa, and Aunt Amy's family too. And ham. Dad says turkey is just for Thanksgiving. I'd love to, Sarah said, realizing as she spoke that it was true. The thought of spending Christmas with Daniel and his family filled her with warmth rather than the anxiety such invitations had triggered in the past. That evening, Daniel called. I hear my son beat me to the Christmas invitation, he said, a smile in his voice. He did mention something about ham, Sarah replied. I was planning to ask you properly. Maybe over dinner this weekend. They had been seeing each other regularly since Thanksgiving. Dinners after Oliver was in bed, Sunday afternoons at museums while Oliver had playdates, even a symphony concert that had left Sarah breathless with the forgotten pleasure of live music. Dinner sounds perfect, Sarah said. Saturday night found them at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, tucked into a corner table with candles and red wine. Sarah wore a dress she hadn't had occasion to wear in years, and Daniel's appreciative glance when he picked her up made her feel beautiful in a way she had forgotten she could feel. Oliver is very excited about you joining us for Christmas, Daniel said as they shared tiramisu. I hope you know what you're getting into. My family takes holidays very seriously. Matching pajamas seriously? Or just regular enthusiasm? Sarah teased. Let's just say there may be caroling involved, Daniel admitted. And my mother's eggnog should probably come with a warning label. Sarah laughed, the sound coming easily these days. I haven't had a proper family Christmas in years, she confessed. I usually volunteer to work at the shelter so others can be with their families. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand. And this year I'd like to make new memories, Sarah said. The week before Christmas break, Sarah's classroom buzzed with holiday energy. The children exchanged small gifts and cards, worked on crafts for their families, and performed in the school's winter concert. Through it all, Sarah found herself present in a way she hadn't been in years, fully engaged in the joy around her rather than just going through the motions. On the last day before break, Principal Edwards stopped by her classroom after the students had left. You seem happy, Sarah, he observed. It suits you. I am, she admitted. Happier than I expected to be. I'm glad, Edwards said sincerely. You've done remarkable work with these children. Especially Oliver Wright. His father mentioned they're looking forward to having you join them for the holidays. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. Yes, they've been very kind to include me. Edward smiled knowingly. Kindness is certainly part of it. He paused at the door. Enjoy your break, Sarah. You've earned it. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow. Sarah arrived at Daniel's house with arms full of presents and a heart full of nervous anticipation. The door opened before she could knock, and Oliver stood there in red and green plaid pajamas, practically vibrating with excitement. "You're here, Dad." "She's here," he called over his shoulder before grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her inside. "You have to put on pajamas too. Everyone wears pajamas until after presents." Daniel appeared from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, wearing matching pajamas to Oliver's. "Sorry about the dress code," he said with a grin. "But house rules are house rules." He handed her a wrapped package. "Your official invitation to Right Family Christmas Madness." Inside was a set of pajamas matching theirs. Sarah laughed, feeling both touched and included in this family tradition. "I'll go change," she said. The day unfolded in a blur of wrapping paper, good food, and laughter. Daniel's parents arrived mid-morning, followed by Amy's family. The house filled with the comfortable chaos of people who loved each other, complete with friendly arguments about the best way to carve the ham and which Christmas movie to watch first. Sarah found herself sitting on the couch between Daniel and Oliver after dinner, a mug of Martha's infamous eggnog in her hand, watching How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Oliver's favorite. Daniel's arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, and Oliver leaned against her side, half asleep despite his determination to stay awake for the entire movie. "This is nice," Daniel whispered, his lips close to her ear. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the sudden lump in her throat. It was more than nice. It was everything she had thought was lost to her forever: family, belonging, love. The realization both terrified and exhilarated her. Later, after Oliver had finally surrendered to sleep and the rest of the family had departed, Sarah helped Daniel clean up the kitchen. "Thank you for today," she said, putting away the last of the leftovers. "It was perfect." Daniel turned from the sink, drying his hands on a towel. "Even the matching pajamas?" "Especially the matching pajamas," Sarah laughed. He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I have one more present for you," he said, but I wasn't sure if it was too soon. From his pocket, he produced a small box. Sarah's heart jumped, but when she opened it, she found a key rather than the ring she had momentarily feared. "It's to the house," Daniel explained quickly. "Not a proposal. Definitely not a proposal. That would be way too soon, and I wouldn't do that without talking to Oliver." And Sarah stopped his nervous rambling with a kiss. When they separated, Daniel looked relieved. "So it's not too soon?" he asked. "It's a key, not a diamond," Sarah said gently. "It's perfect timing." As winter melted into spring, Sarah found herself spending more and more time at Daniel's house. She kept her apartment, but stayed over several nights a week. Oliver adjusted to her increased presence with the adaptability of children, seeming to find it perfectly natural to find Sarah at the breakfast table or helping with homework in the evenings. At school, Sarah maintained her professionalism, careful to treat Oliver exactly as she treated the other students. If the other children noticed that Oliver's father picked Sarah up after school events, they didn't comment on it. One warm April evening, Sarah sat on Daniel's back porch, grading papers while he worked on blueprints for a new project. Oliver played in the yard, building an elaborate fort with sticks and old sheets. The domesticity of the scene struck Sarah suddenly. How naturally they had all fit into each other's lives. How seamlessly they had created this new family configuration. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, noticing her pause. "How different everything is from a year ago," Sarah said honestly. "How much has changed?" Daniel set down his pencil. "Good changes. The best," Sarah assured him. "Just, sometimes I still feel guilty for being happy. Like I'm betraying Mike and the baby by moving forward." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I think that's normal. But Sarah, no one who loved you would want you to stay frozen in grief forever." "I know," she said softly. "In my head, I know that." "The heart takes longer," Daniel acknowledged. "But it gets there eventually." As if on cue, Oliver called from the yard. "Dad, Sarah, come see my fort. It's the best one ever." They walked hand in hand to the backyard, where Oliver proudly showed them the structure he had created, imperfect, a bit lopsided, but standing strong nonetheless. "What do you think?" Oliver asked eagerly. "I think it's exactly as it should be," Sarah said, looking not just at the fort but at the three of them standing together in the fading sunlight. Later that night, After Oliver was asleep, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a photo she kept in her wallet. It was the last picture taken of her and Mike together, his hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly, both of them smiling at a future they believed was guaranteed. Daniel found her there, tears silently tracking down her cheeks. Without a word, he sat beside her, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. "I miss them," Sarah whispered. "But I love you and Oliver too. Sometimes it feels impossible to hold both those things at once." "But you do," Daniel said simply. "Every day, you hold both. That's what makes you who you are." He gently took the photo from her hands, looking at it with respect rather than jealousy. "He would be glad, I think, that you found your way back to living." Sarah leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "The school year ends in 2 months," she said, changing the subject. "Oliver will move on to 5th grade. Does that change things for us?" Daniel asked. Sarah shook her head. "No, but I've been thinking, maybe it's time I let go of my apartment. If that's something you and Oliver would want." Daniel turned to face her fully. "Are you saying you want to move in officially?" "I'm saying I want to stop living between 2 places," Sarah clarified. "I'm saying I want to come home to you and Oliver every night, not just some nights." Daniel's smile bloomed slowly, like sunrise. "We want that too. Very much." As they sat together planning their future, Sarah felt the familiar twinge of guilt, but alongside it was something stronger, hope, and the certainty that this new life she was building didn't diminish what came before. It honored it. Every day she spent loving Oliver and Daniel was a testament to her capacity to heal, to grow, to embrace life again after unimaginable loss. Spring turned toward summer, and with it came change. Oliver's graduation from 4th grade, Sarah packing up her classroom, boxes of her belongings slowly migrating to Daniel's house. Their house now, a new family taking shape, not replacing what was lost, but building something new and precious from the foundations of grief and recovery. On the last day of school, Oliver presented Sarah with a handmade card. Inside, he had drawn 3 stick figures holding hands, a tall one labeled Dad, a medium one labeled Sarah, and a smaller one labeled me. Underneath, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for being my teacher, and for making Dad smile again, and for being part of our family." Sarah hugged him close, this child who had unexpectedly become part of her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping me find my way home."